Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled, Canada's Green Rush, Bringing Cannabis Health Products to Market. My name is Margot, and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank KGK Science, who developed the content for this presentation. KGK Science is a global contract research organization that has specialized in human clinical trials for the health, nutrition, and cannabis industry for over 21 years. KGK Science integrates scientific, clinical research, and commercial and regulatory expertise to deliver solutions for propelling health and wellness products to market. KGK Science is focused on utilizing evidence-based scientific research to best serve working partnerships with global brands and marketing dietary supplements, branded ingredients, functional foods and beverages, and medical foods, seeking to maintain long-term relationships with their employees, customers, suppliers, and other industry participants. KGK Science conducts its business on the basis of quality, reliability, innovation, and integrity. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Andrew Charette leads the Regulatory Affairs Division of KGK Science and has in-depth knowledge of the cannabis regulations in North America, Europe, and Uruguay. He has experience in submitting cannabis research license applications to Health Canada under the new Cannabis Act, organizing over 50 submissions to Health Canada, and has provided consulting for numerous product claims as well as NDIN and GRAS submissions. Andrew received his undergraduate degree in pharmacology and physiology from the University of Western Ontario, and later obtained a master's degree in neuroscience from the University of Ottawa. And our second speaker is Najla Guthrie. She is the president and CEO of KGK Science and has internationally recognized scientist in the field of nutrition. Najla has published over 32 papers in peer-reviewed journals and in her 21 years of operating KGK Science. She has been responsible for the recruitment of an integrated research and product development team that today maintains a reputation for world-class nutraceutical science with an emerging expertise in cannabis research. Najla is widely recognized as a leading nutraceutical industry expert and spokesperson, as well as being active in several nutraceutical industry groups. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the presentation over to our speakers. You may begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. The intended audience for this webinar are those companies or individuals who are interested in developing cannabinoid-containing self-care products for the North American market. We will be referring to self-care products when speaking about products that are non-prescription and may include OTC, NHP, or dietary supplement products. We'll first cover the current regulations governing cannabis products in Canada and the US, and how we anticipate that regulations around self-care products may change. We hope that this introductory portion will ensure that the audience has a uniform understanding of what can be sold where and what markets we think will become available. The second half of the webinar will cover what is required to bring a product to market under the current regulations for NHPs and OTCs in Canada and for dietary supplements in the US, as well as the path required to market prescription drugs. We will detail the overlap of these requirement pathways and highlight the data that is important no matter what pathway is taken. We hope by the end of the presentation, you'll have a better understanding of what you can do to minimize regulatory risk and delays in marketing your product. So I'm going to start by describing the current state of regulations concerning health products with cannabis in Canada. Cannabis is currently only legal for recreational use in the form of flower or oil extract. Based on the recently released proposed regulations, October 29th will see edible, concentrate, and topical forms legalized in Canada, but there is currently no option for health claims on these products. Cannabis is currently available for medical use through oversight of a licensed healthcare practitioner. However, the same limits on the form of flower and oil extract exist, and there's no pre-market review for these products, and likewise, no health claims are allowed. Cannabis-containing health products making health claims are able to be marketed, but this is through the prescription drug route. Currently, there's only one cannabis drug approved by Health Canada, and that is Sativex. Health claims are allowed on health products with cannabis, but as I mentioned, require a pre-market review, the same as any prescription drug would, and the purchase of products can only be made with a prescription from a healthcare practitioner. Oversight by a physician is a key issue that is being debated in this arena and we'll delve into the arguments surrounding this later on in the presentation. As mentioned, in order to manufacture and sell cannabinoid-containing health products under the current regulations, prescription drug requirements must be met, meaning that a drug establishment license is also required. This dual licensing system means that additionally, the manufacturer must also meet the security, tracking, and good production practice requirements of the Cannabis Act and obtain a cannabis drug license. The U.S. regulatory environment is different but also remains unsettled. The FDA approved the drug Epidiolex earlier in 2018. Epidiolex is the first drug to gain FDA approval that contains CBD derived from cannabis. This was a landmark decision as it led to the FDA rescheduling FDA-approved drugs containing CBD from Schedule 1 to Schedule 5. And this opens up the door for other cannabis-containing drugs to be approved and sold in the U.S. In order for the drug to be studied and approved, for any drug to be studied and approved, it must first attain approval as an investigational new drug. This is part of the normal process for studying any new potential drugs, but it has implications for the use of CBD as an ingredient in other products, namely dietary supplements. If an ingredient is registered for an IND, it precludes it from consideration as a dietary ingredient, meaning that in the opinion of the FDA, CBD cannot be used in dietary supplements. This precedent has previously been argued in the case of pyridoxamine dihydrochloride. The pharmaceutical company BioStratum had obtained an IND for studying this ingredient, which was also included in marketed dietary supplements at the time. The FDA eventually sided with BioStratum and took action against the inclusion of pyridoxamine dihydrochloride as a dietary ingredient. A case that could resemble the way in which the FDA may approach CBD is that of the Pharmanex case. Pharmanex was selling a dietary supplement called Colestin, which contains the ingredient mevinolin. Mevinolin is derived from red yeast rice and is chemically identical to the drug lovastatin, which is marketed by Merck. The FDA ruled that Colestin was a drug and not a dietary supplement, as the levels of mevinolin found in the product were greater than what was found traditionally in red yeast rice products, and therefore Colestin was more similar to a drug than to a red yeast rice dietary supplement. So these cases have been frequently discussed recently, as the cannabis industry has been speculating how the FDA will react to the recent passing of the Farm Bill. The 2018 Farm Bill, which was passed in December, opens up the interstate commerce of industrial hemp and its derivatives in the U.S., which will create a widely available source of CBD. While this removes a significant barrier for the cannabis industry, inclusion of CBD in self-care products remains legally unclear on a federal level, and many states have echoed the FDA's statements on including CBD in food and dietary supplements. Despite the current state of the regulations in the U.S., there is hope and tremendous pressure for things to change. There already exists a large industry of self-care health products that contain cannabinoids in states where recreational use of cannabis is legalized and on the black market. The FDA has recently indicated that they will be open to taking meetings to discuss the state of CBD and as a food or dietary ingredient. And they've indicated that the public and congressional interest in developing hemp products is driving them to look for regulatory pathways in which CBD could be considered as a food or dietary ingredient. With this in mind, the companies in the hemp space should now be considering beginning to assemble self-affirmed GRAS or new dietary ingredient notifications. These similar documents both confirm safety of an ingredient, and both must be supported with safety data derived from research. So throughout the remainder of this webinar, we'll be referring to self-care products and drugs. For this purpose, we're defining self-care products as over-the-counter drugs and natural health products or dietary supplements. The use of the word drugs will be referring to prescription drugs. The reason that we refer to OTCs and NHPs as self-care products is that they are products that you are permitted to use for treating yourself without the oversight of a doctor. The approach of regulators in deciding whether a substance should be allowed to be openly sold in stores or require a prescription is whether it is appropriate for use by a layperson based on the benefit and the risk of the substance. There are a number of factors that go into making this decision, which include whether the condition that the substance is meant to treat is easily diagnosed by a layperson, the use of the drug, whether the use of the drug may mask another disease, for instance, hide the symptoms of another condition, whether the side effects of the drug require that a doctor monitors the patient, whether the dosing is complicated or whether the dose required for therapeutic benefit or safe use is very precise, meaning that it only works at a particular blood level or is easily overdosed with, if there's potential for abuse or if there's limited market experience with the drug. These are all the factors that they'll consider. OTC pharmaceuticals must undergo the same approval process as a prescription drug and then are eventually assessed for these criteria to determine whether they're appropriate for self-care. Once the decision is made that they're added to a list of OTC drugs and the approval process becomes simplified as the new product, as any other new products must fall within the specifications of a monograph. A similar system exists in both Canada and the US, and the Canadian system they're looking to change that soon or modify it. Natural health products and dietary supplements are where the regulations diverge between the countries. In Canada, natural health products are a subset of drugs and must undergo a pre-market review that looks at the safety, quality, and efficacy evidence for that product. The reason that this occurs is because companies are able to make more similar claims to those that are made with drugs if they have evidence to support it. In the US, dietary supplements are a subset of food and therefore do not require pre-market approval, but with the introduction of a new dietary ingredient, a notification must be sent to the FDA within 75 days of marketing the product to prove it's safe. In the US, you're mostly restricted to nutrient and structure function claims. So why are we talking about how to prepare for marketing self-care products which contain cannabis if they are not allowed on the market? Well, there's good reason to believe that the regulations will change over time. Health Canada has publicly announced that there is insufficient evidence to support allowing cannabis-containing products for self-care. This comes back to the physician oversight and the factors that go into making a decision to classify the product for self-care. The good piece of this is that it indicates that Health Canada is not outright opposed to allowing products for self-care, but rather are asking for more evidence to support the change in regulations. This is a cautious approach, but it doesn't help to address some of the current issues that are going on. One of these issues is, in my opinion, the common sense issue. Many lobbying groups are now leveraging the argument that CBD is often used by the public as a medicine and not to get high. Whether being accessed through prescription from a physician or not, the recreational cannabis market offers high CBD, low THC strains, which basically allow for self-care in a less controlled fashion than what would be possible with a regulated self-care market. It's common sense to think that products that are designed specifically to treat certain medical conditions, proven to be safe through pre-market review, and have labels appropriate for specific dosing are going to be more appropriately used than the raw source that is also available. Another significant issue is that cannabis-containing self-care products are already being sold in U.S. states where cannabis is legal and on the black market in Canada. The public is interested in these products and they're accessing them already in an unsanctioned way. There's been very little policing of these products going on, and although some states have indicated that their policies are aligned with the FDA, there's still a thriving industry in place. There's already and bound to be more pressure on regulators to either move towards enforcement or establish a legal controlled market. Additionally, with topical products coming to the market in Canada in 2019, it introduces a product form that closely resembles a self-care product, but for which no claims can be made. It makes sense to me that over time, the regulations will evolve with the marketing of these types of products to allow for indications and conditions of use to be introduced to avoid unauthorized use and promote the safe use of the products. Lastly, the industrial hemp industry has been growing steadily, and with the passing of the Farm Bill in the U.S., it's poised to explode. There will be a commodity industry producing an ingredient that has an established market demand for food and cannabis health products. The public already accepts hemp as a food and self-care product ingredient, and this looming source of CBD being available is going to put incredible pressure on regulators to establish legal channels for the industry. So there are two ways in which the regulations may change to support the sale of cannabis-containing self-care products. Firstly, and most simply, is that the law has changed. This is what has been done with the legalization of cannabis in Canada and in some U.S. states. This obviously takes time, but is the faster of the two routes to introducing change. The other option is what's called a switch submission. This is a regulatory submission that's aimed at removing or modifying the prescription drug list in Canada. And in the U.S., there's a similar process for introducing a new drug to the list of OTC drugs. In Canada, there are both drugs and natural health products on the prescription drug list. And NHP ingredients may be listed on it at a particular dose. So in order to move a substance off of the prescription drug list, there is a substantial burden of proof that's required. This evidence is required to demonstrate that the substance meets all of the requirements previously mentioned for allowing self-care products and removing physician oversight. These submissions can take years to process. One example in Canada is that of vitamin D. It is considered a prescription drug if more than 1,000 IU is included in the product. Over time, data amassed which supported the increase of this limit, and the international agencies also made changes to their recommendations. And a switch submission was submitted in 2013, with a decision finally being made in 2018, with new guidelines being announced in 2019. So with that timeline, you can see that a switch submission is likely to be the slower of the two routes. And in addition, it may not allow for the establishment of tailored regulations that a legislation change could afford. So it can be very difficult to accurately predict what regulators are going to do in the future. So rather than state explicit predictions of what the regulations may be, we're going to go through some of the considerations that should be observed when thinking of including cannabinoids in self-care products. First and foremost, you can expect that a regulator will look to what is currently working in the pharma, OTC, NHP, and cannabis regulations. Standardized cannabis symbols, drug fact panels, plain language labeling requirements, child-resistant packaging, and requirements for differences in the names and look of product labels are almost likely. These requirements are likely to be embraced by the industry, as the cannabis industry has already demonstrated that they're legitimately concerned with ensuring their products are safely used. Federal regulators also draw upon the opinion of international agencies such as the World Health Organization and their developing regulations. WHO has indicated that in a critical review report of CBD that demonstrates a good safety profile with no indication of abuse or dependence potential, no evidence for recreational use, and great potential as an effective therapeutic product. It further highlights that the widespread unsanctioned use of CBD, which suggests that regulations need to evolve along with the products. The report indicates that any adverse reactions reported are due to interactions with other drugs, which further supports the development of regulations that fit a substance with a strong safety profile and potential for medicinal benefit. One reason that regulators may require more research on CBD and other cannabinoids is that CBD is an inhibitor of cytochrome P450 enzymes that the liver uses for processing many medications. This is a valid concern, as concomitant use of CBD may modify the amount of other medications present in the body, making instructions for those medications inaccurate. However, this being said, there are many other commonly consumed substances that affect these liver enzymes, such as grapefruit and St. John's wort. Again, this is an argument for developing self-care regulatory pathways, as introducing packaging and labeling regulations tailored to medicinal use of CBD would improve the safety for the consumer. Research thus far has also shown that achieving effective doses with CBD can be a challenge. One study investigating the effect of CBD in anxiety caused by public speaking showed that there was an inverse U-shaped dose curve. And what this means is that increasing the dose increased the anxiolytic effect of CBD until a certain point at which it began to increase anxiety again. This again bolsters the argument for developing scientifically substantiated products with consistent potency to facilitate accurate dosing. Additional scientific evidence is required for each indication of interest, and the instructions for dosing need to be available for consumers on the label. Lastly, most obviously, THC is an intoxicant. It's very likely that regulations that may allow for self-care products to be marketed would include limits on the allowable amount of THC in them. Hemp is defined as containing less than 0.3% THC, and currently in the US there isn't much consideration of CBD derived from marijuana rather than hemp, but this is something that may arise in developing self-care products, as there is some research and much speculation that some amount of THC or other cannabinoids are required to achieve a therapeutic effect. This is something that will develop with more research, so the inclusion of limited amounts of THC may not be out of the question. There are numerous intoxicating substances, such as the cough suppressant dextromethorphan, which are carefully marketed as self-care medications that are allowable because the benefits outweigh the risks of abuse. So as the regulations are likely to mimic those that we see in self-care products now, so is the process of bringing the products to market. It will likely follow the same product development process. There's a similar progression of studies that are required in both Canada and the US in order to provide the evidence that are required to market a drug. This includes preclinical studies that will show that the product is safe to test in humans, and maybe some mechanism of action as well. And then move into clinical trials. In the US, in order to conduct a clinical trial, an IND is required. In Canada, a clinical trial application is required, which can be a little bit faster. The phase 1 clinical trials assess safety in their small-scale trials, also pharmacokinetics. Phase 2 trials are small-scale efficacy trials that also assess safety. And phase 3 trials are confirmatory trials that confirm safety and efficacy. Following that, there's a drug submission approval process and then post-marketing activities. Natural health products in Canada require a similar research development process. The basics are the same, the burden of proof is a little bit less. Basically, you still need to go through the preclinical process, as well as the phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trial process, whereas phase 3 may or may not be required. The PLA submission and approval process is still there, as well as post-marketing activities. On the previous slide, it mentioned in words there that pre-approved and novel claims are available in NHPs in Canada, and that the data requirements depend on the risk of the risk assessment of the product. So basically, a product license application in Canada can be separated into 3 different classes. Class 1 and 2 refer to pre-cleared information or product monographs that are put out, product or ingredient monographs put out by Health Canada. These contain pre-approved claims based on the specs that must be met in terms of the dose, the warnings, and other information that may be required. The difference between Class 1 and Class 2 products are that Class 1 includes single ingredient products that fall within the bounds of the monograph, whereas Class 2 products include multiple ingredients, all of which fall within their respective monographs. You can make monograph claims for each individual ingredient, even in combination products. Class 3 submissions basically cover everything that is not a Class 1 or Class 2. And you will need evidence for both safety and efficacy in order to cover these and have a positive submission. The amount of evidence required to support this is based on risk and what ingredients you're submitting, and it's done on a case-by-case basis. Nutrients and structure function claims are allowed to be made on these products, same as what is done in the US. However, in addition, you can make prevention, treatment, and cure claims if there is evidence to support them. So the pathway to market for both drugs and natural health products has considerable overlap in those first 3 phases of research. This makes it a safe bet to move forward through the first 3 stages of the process with a cannabis-containing product. FDA and Health Canada have expressed that additional research is required, and this means that investing in this research may also aid in pushing forward the regulations towards self-care products. In the US, the same safety research derived from these types of studies is required for both GRAS and NDI submissions. The key to success will be understanding the options, planning ahead, and acting prior to regulations changing, because once the regulations have changed, everybody is going to want access to the market, but they may not be ready. At this time, we're going to take a short break and do a couple quick poll questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, it is now time for the poll portion of our webinar, where you can vote in real time by clicking one of the following options. Our poll question for today is, what market are you considering your cannabis product for? Is it option 1, US only self-care, option 2, Canada only self-care, option 3, North America self-care, option 4, North America RX, or our last option, any and or? I'll give the audience a couple more moments to get their votes in so we can read out those results. And our question for today is, what market are you considering your cannabis product for? Click one of the following options. Perfect, and it looks like we have all of our polling answers in for today. So for what market are you considering your cannabis product for? 37% of the audience voted and any or. 32% of the audience voted North America self-care. 12% of the audience voted US only self-care. 10% of the audience voted North America RX, and 9% of the audience voted Canada only self-care. And in addition to that, we will be launching the second poll, which is, what industry is your company native to? Please select one of the following options. Is it NHP/DS, OTC pharma, RX pharma, cannabis, or other? And I'll give the audience a moment to get in those questions and results. And our question for today is, what industry is your company native to? And it looks like our audience is still choosing their answer, so I'll give you one more moment. And our poll results for what industry is your company native to, 36% of the audience voted NHP/DS, 21% of the audience voted RX Pharma, 24% of the audience voted other, with 8% voting OTC Pharma, and 11% voting cannabis. And without further ado, I'd like to hand the presentation back to our speakers.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew, for that overview. I'm going to pick up where you left off. So the next segment of the presentation is going to address, where to do research and how do you decide what partner to work with and what you should look for when considering your research plans. So research with cannabis is far more accessible in Canada than in the US at this time. In the US, an investigational new drug application, or IND, is required and automatically classifies the product as a drug. Research in Canada can be conducted in any sphere, not just medical research, but all research requires that a license be granted prior to commencing. The licensing process for clinical research must occur after gaining approval for the clinical trial protocol. There are a number of process and security requirements that need to be implemented in order to gain a research license approval. You will want to work with an experienced group who knows how to navigate this process. Universities tend to have a longer process for obtaining regulatory approvals. Generally, universities require their own internal institutional review board, or IRB, in addition to the governmental regulatory process, which can slow things down. The institutional ethics board alone can take up to 6 months or more to review and approve a project, compared to 2 to 3 weeks for a central IRB. Beyond timeline, universities also have a mandate to publish. The sponsor may not want results published for a number of reasons, including intellectual property protection, not wanting their competitors to know, what studies they're doing or what the results are. These are some of the reasons. In addition, students are usually working on projects which may mean that multiple cohorts of students span the execution of the clinical trial. This can be a risky co-founder and can introduce variability. CROs provide an advantage at this stage of development. Even though the cost may be more, they can guide the sponsor through the process by obtaining regulatory approvals, qualify clinical sites, they can do the recruitment, source document and case report form creation, as well as data management and interpretation. So changes in regulations are generally very slow to be implemented. Health Canada has recently released the draft regulations for edibles and concentrates for comment. These regulations are scheduled to be implemented by October 2019. It is possible that self-care products may be the next set of regulations to be considered. Consumer awareness and interest in self-care products is quite high. Although we do not know if and when that may occur, companies interested in developing cannabis health products should begin planning their research program now. The development of a product or family of products may take 1 to 2 years depending on the complexity of the formulation and delivery system. In fact, it can take even longer than this for novel formulations. Developing a schedule for product development and the required testing is key. The timeline estimates presented here are based on conducting the research through a well-organized CRO, or contract research organization, who is able to coordinate regulatory submissions and overlay the timelines wherever possible. As a rough guideline, preclinical testing may take 6 months to a year based on the scope of testing that is required. This would cover the basic toxicity studies that would be recommended after an assessment of the product formulation by a regulatory consultant or toxicologist. Clinical studies take more time to conduct. The basic phase 1 studies would take anywhere from 6 months to a year, depending again on the scope of data that is required to support product development and/or establish the safety of the formulation in humans. Phase 2 studies are the longest phase of the timeline presented, taking 1 to 2 years depending on the indication that is being studied and the number of subjects required to properly power the study to provide the optimal chance of significance. If you are working with something very novel or looking at the product being used to treat multiple indications, multiple phase 2 trials may be required. Again, This is something that a regulatory consultant can assist you with determining. Lastly, the licensing process is likely to take time. This is still a wild card at this point, as we don't know what the regulatory system will look like. But based on drug and self-care submission, this could take anywhere from 1 month to 2 years. As mentioned earlier, there is a requirement of cannabis research licenses in Canada. The research licensing process is currently taking a number of months, but it is expected to speed up once the backlog of initial license submissions from legalization is cleared up. The key takeaway here is to begin your planning now. Many companies are currently in the initial phase of this first step, which is assessing the market for an opportunity and looking for a technology or proprietary formulation that can support a business venture into the cannabis space. There's a lot of opportunity in what is predicted to be a $20 billion market. In order to move forward, some initial testing is required to ensure that the product that you are developing is going to be viable. This may involve analytical and in vitro testing to determine the right carrier, extraction, or blend to move into the next phase of testing. An additional part of the initial step is assessing the regulatory risks and research requirements related to your product. How are the ingredients classified? What dose is allowed? Is the delivery method permitted? And is there additional testing required to gain approval? Is intellectual property protection an option? A preliminary review of this type may require outside counsel, and it is best to have a good understanding of these issues prior to investing in the research process. Lastly, when ready to move into the research phase, ensure that you have assembled a dossier of the manufacturing quality specifications that can be updated throughout the research process. Having this documentation will help to make both the preclinical research process and regulatory submission associated with the clinical research run more smoothly. Preclinical work is the first step in looking at whether the product you believe is going to be successful is showing promise. There are a number of different types of studies that can be completed to gain the knowledge that you require to make business decisions about the product, and also to assess whether the product is likely to be safe and well tolerated in humans. From a regulatory perspective, if you are working with something novel and unproven in humans, you will likely be required to have some basic toxicity data to provide support for studying the product in clinical trials later on. Generally, a first step is to do some in vitro work, which is less expensive and may inform you about how your product may work, how much of the active ingredients are making it into the system, if the product is likely to be toxic or genotoxic, and even whether it may be effective. There are many different models in cell culture to work with. If you do not have an internal scientific team, a contract research organization can help guide you through this. Animal studies are the other type of preclinical work that generally follows or parallels the in vitro work. Acute toxicity studies are generally done in rodents and involve a single dose. There are different designs that can be implemented, but generally you want to gain an idea of what the lethal and maximum tolerated doses are so that you can set a number of doses to study further. A subchronic 90-day study tests a number of doses and is used to determine the highest dose that has no adverse effects. The no observed adverse effects level is a key number that is used in calculations to determine the dose range that should be tested or used in humans. Again, if you are working with something novel, you should be considering studying the effects of the product in a non-rodent species as well. This will test whether the effects are specific to rodents or if they are translatable between species, and bolsters the evidence that the product is appropriate for use in humans. It is highly recommended and may be required that the studies are performed and reported according to good laboratory practice. This is something that regulatory bodies will be looking for and is another reason to use a reputable lab. There are other types of studies, both in vitro and in vivo, that can assess how your product is processed by the body and what effects it has. Gathering this type of data can allow you to begin to formulate your marketing strategy. Once you have the requirements to move ahead with human testing, which will be based on your specific product, you will likely want to move into phase 1 clinical research. Basic formulations will require far less than new or modified molecules, but often companies want to confirm the pharmacokinetics of their particular formulation to support the competitive advantage they believe they may have. In pharmacokinetic studies, a small number of healthy subjects, usually 12, are given a single dose of a product, and blood is serially drawn over a period of time. This allows the researchers to plot the blood levels of the active component and to determine the time it takes to absorb into the system and be excreted out. This can be done with a single product or multiple products that are compared to each other. This is particularly important test with cannabis products, as absorption of cannabis is difficult and increased bioavailability represents an important competitive advantage. The other type of phase 1 study is a safety study. Usually this involves around 20 healthy subjects who repeatedly consume the product over a short period of time, and any adverse events or effects on safety of blood parameters are assessed. Again, human testing requires both approval of Health Canada and an ethics board, and can take longer than preclinical work to complete. In order to move into the next phase of human testing, which assesses the effectiveness of the product, regulators will want to see data that establishes if the product is safe. Phase 2 clinical trials are the most exciting phase of the product development, as they are where you prove if the product does what you think it's going to do. In order to ensure that your investment in a phase 2 trial will stand up to regulatory scrutiny, you should conduct a randomized double-blind controlled trial. You will need to work with experts in the field to ensure that your study is designed correctly and conducted and documented according to the ICH guidelines for good clinical practice. The key elements to keep in mind are that you should be selecting one endpoint that is the primary question that you are studying. It can be very tempting to include many targets in order to get as much out of the trial as you can. However, in order to statistically assess your results correctly, having more than one primary goal may dilute the significance of the study. You can implement multiple secondary endpoints, but these are generally used for fact-finding and not to substantiate claims. You want to ensure that the subjects are being treated for long enough for the intended effect to be correctly assessed, and you may consider comparing multiple doses to determine the lowest dose that is effective. Statistical considerations are also key, so you need to do a sample size estimation to ensure that the study is powered with enough subjects to support the results. Otherwise, the results may be considered simply proof of concept and may not be confirmatory. The analysis of the results should be well planned ahead of time and documented as such to prove that you did not mind the results for positive findings after the data was collected. In order to implement all of these requirements correctly, you will need to work with experts in conducting clinical research and a biostatistician. Depending on the regulatory requirements, you may need to repeat studies to confirm results, or you may want to further explore interesting findings obtained from an initial study to expand the indications of your product. Phase 3 studies are large-scale studies used to confirm the effectiveness and safety of drugs. They are not generally required for natural health products. Will Phase 3 studies be required for cannabis-containing products? At this point, we don't know. It will depend on whether these products are regulated like NHPs, like natural health products, or drugs. The good news is that the research required up to this point is similar, no matter which regulatory route is implemented. It is always beneficial to have the research that supports the safety, the mechanism of action, and effectiveness of your product. Based on the established gray market and high level of consumer interest in self-care cannabis health products, regulators will need to carefully evaluate the research data as they carefully consider next steps. As a sponsor, following the established research path will allow you the flexibility to pursue either route and to properly develop a product that can withstand regulatory scrutiny, as well as put you ahead of your competitors. And to summarize, there is a big opportunity in the cannabis space for self-care products. Many large healthcare product companies are already establishing partnerships with the cannabis industry. At this point, regulators are taking a slow and safe approach to introducing cannabis-containing products that can make health claims and be used without the oversight of a physician. Health Canada is publicly encouraging medical research in this area, and the impact of research is not restricted by borders. The FDA has made it clear that they are not allowing CBD products, so federal changes are being made in the hemp industry, which is a step in the right direction. When trying to anticipate what regulations will look like, expect regulations to mimic those of the OTC and NHP world, as they have been established as effective. This means that the path to market involves research, whether it is the path to marketing a drug or a natural health product. The types and requirements of the research are the same. Research is required to drive the regulations. Health Canada has explicitly indicated so. The framework of the regulations will be based on the data that's available to regulators and the speed of which this data is accumulated. With a robust research program in place, no matter how the regulations change, you remain on track to get a well-studied, regulatory-ready product to market. Having this data available will allow you to stay ahead of the regulatory changes and reduce your risk of insufficient information and delay. This will also give you a competitive advantage. Working with regulatory experts, product developers specialized in sophisticated cannabis formulations, and contract research organizations that are experienced in conducting cannabis research and have the proper licensing will provide the high-quality science at a pace that will facilitate this advantage. And at this point, I'd like to tell you to please stay tuned for the next webinar in this series, which will delve into the needs and considerations of formulating cannabis health products. As many of you know, this can be a very sophisticated process, and this is something where the experts from DoseCan, which is a state-of-the-art cannabis product formulator, is going to address in the next webinar. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that insightful presentation. I'd now like to invite our audience to continue sending in those questions, and I've already received a few, so we'll begin our Q&A session with our speakers. Our first question for today is, can I sell a health product in Canada or the US that contains CBD derived from hemp?
Sure. So at the moment, the only path, as I mentioned, would be in Canada would be through a prescription drug. If you were going to make a health claim on that product, it doesn't matter whether it's derived from marijuana or cannabis or from hemp. If it's concentrated cannabinoids in it, it's going to fall under the same pathway. In the U.S., it's unclear. It depends on which state and whether the hemp is derived from that state and sold within that state. It would depend on a number of things.
Thank you for that answer. And our next question from our audience is, what forms of the oil are allowed, capsule and or vaping?
So in Canada currently, you can have oil capsules. You cannot have vape products. That is something that is looking to be introduced in October 2019.
Our next question from our audience is, could a natural health product get approved by Health Canada if CBD or another cannabinoid using cannabis sativa as its source gets listed in the NHPID, and they could submit a PLA for an NHP approval?
Well, I don't think that they would add CBD to the NHPID without there being a regulation framework in place first. So I don't think that you could force that to happen by adding it to it, because Health Canada is the one who oversees the NHPID, and they wouldn't add it if there wasn't a regulatory framework in place.
Our next question is, what about importing cannabis products to/from US and to/from Canada? What regs is there to look for?
So from the Canadian side, you can look at the industrial hemp regulations. You're going to need a license for, first off, producing industrial hemp, and then a permit for import or export of it. On the US side, it is handled by the border, but it gets to be a little more complicated as well. So this is something that I would definitely refer you to a lawyer to to investigate.
Our next question is, given the current knowledge of CBD pathways, will the US FDA be requiring preclinical data, or is it anticipated that there can be some piggybacking of a current research?
So if you were to put together a GRAS submission, all the research and an NDI submission, you're free to refer to the totality of the evidence. So you want to be looking for other research that's done. It will depend on your product though and how it's manufactured and what the dosage form is. You may need specific research specific to your product depending on how it is derived and what research is out there.
Our next question is, appreciating the range of variables, would you kindly provide ranges for costs that can be expected for the full clinical study process? Some examples of different projects along with budget and outcomes would be fantastic.
Sure, that's always a key question when discussing clinical trials. So it's hard to tell you a specific cost. I can definitely give you a range of costs. Because the variables in a clinical trial will depend on, how many subjects are you going to have in the trial, how many visits are going to happen in that trial, what endpoints are we looking at, how extensive is it, how long does it go for, is it a pharmacokinetic study where it's one dose, or is it an efficacy study that's running over, 6 months. So all of those variables will affect the cost. But generally, to do a good, decent trial that's going to stand up to, that's not a proof of concept, that's going to stand up to regulatory scrutiny, your range is going to be anywhere from $250,000 for, a pharmacokinetic type of study to, it could go, over, I would say, $1 to $2 million, depending on how many subjects. So if you've got a study with an efficacy study that's 200 subjects, that's going to be obviously a lot more than a study that's 20 or 30 subjects. So that's, those are the variables that you would have to consider, but that's hopefully a range that would help guide you in your budgeting process.
Our next question is, with the new proposed edible regulations, can I sell a cannabis product that does not make health claims?
So yes, you could. My understanding from the proposed regulations is yes, you would be able to sell a product with no health claims, but there are restrictions on what you can include as ingredients in that product and the format of the product as well. For an edible product, it needs to contain only food ingredients and be in a food format. So we'll see how the regulations, the final regulations come about, but and hopefully there's clarity in that in the final regulations, but it would really depend on the product itself.
Interesting. And our next question is, if you are going to do a clinical study on a cannabis product, does it have to be done in the state where the product is produced, since it can't ship across state lines?
That will depend on whether the formula for that product can be manufactured elsewhere. So, we do have U.S. companies that do the study here with us in Canada, and that we can conduct it at our site in Canada if we can, find a local company to manufacture the product and to manufacture that formulation for the clinical study here. Because you're right, you can't ship it across borders right now.
Our next question is CBD considered a new dietary supplement in the USA under FDA?
So no, it's not at the moment. It's still unclear. Basically, the FDA has stated that they consider it a drug ingredient at the moment. That being said, they are looking into it. Basically, they're holding meetings with people from industry or other folks who are interested in changing these regulations and looking to develop a pathway to allow for that, which is why we've recommended looking for a pathway to have it as either a dietary ingredient or a food ingredient. And this is why we're recommending, if you are looking to market a product that is a dietary supplement or a food, you may want to consider starting doing research, or at least starting to assemble the research that's out there available for a GRAS submission, a self-affirmed GRAS, or for an NDI submission, looking ahead to things changing.
Interesting. And our next question from our audience is, when do you think the FDA will address the inclusion of CBD as a dietary ingredient?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure exactly on the timeline of when they would consider that, when the FDA would consider that. But you know, as Andrew mentioned, they are holding meetings right now, and you know, following those meetings, we'll see what the consensus would be.
Thank you for that answer. Our next question is, can cannabis oil contain other active ingredients?
So in Canada, at the moment, under the current regulations, the only ingredients can be the cannabis itself, the carrier oil, and any other ingredient that is needed for maintaining quality or stability of the cannabis oil product. Of course, there may be trace levels of contaminants in there as well, but that doesn't include anything that you would add to it. So in terms of flavors or other active ingredients, you're not allowed anything under the current regulations. When this will change when the new regulations are put in place, so it's something to keep a lookout for.
Our next question is, can research from other cannabis studies be used to support bringing a product to market?
I mean, you always will look at the totality of evidence that's out there and that's in the public domain as you're you know, putting the dossier together for your product to support bringing it to market. However, depending on how novel and unique and specific your own formulation is, you know, you need to have research on that particular formulation in order for you to provide the safety and especially the efficacy of that formulation, if that's you know, what you're going to be able to, the claim that you're going to say about it in the marketplace. I mean, right now claims aren't allowable, but if you're looking into the future, it should be on that final product that is your product.
Well, thank you very much for those answers. We've reached the end of our question and answers portion of this webinar. If you have further questions, please direct them to the email address and phone number now showing on your screen. And if you can share this webinar on LinkedIn by clicking the link I've sent in the chat box, that would be much appreciated. Thank you for everyone in participating in today's conference. You will be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen, and your participation is appreciated, as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers, Andrew Charette and Najla Guthrie. We hope you found this conference informative, and have a great day, everyone.